The Fool, a psychological reflection. When we enter the landscape of the human psyche, one figure appears repeatedly, timeless and familiar: the fool. Psychologically, the fool is one of the most relatable and enduring archetypes. Across cultures and throughout history, fools have stirred laughter, disruption, and an unexpected kind of wisdom. Humanity has always held a fascination with folly, not merely recognizing it in others, but also engaging in it ourselves. To stumble, to play, and to reveal our imperfections is not weakness, but rather part of our shared inheritance as human beings. Yet, many of us suffer today because the fool has been exiled from our lives. In modern society, we are taught to take ourselves with relentless seriousness, to be efficient, professional, overproductive, so much so that we begin to identify with functioning as machinery rather than as dynamic beings. We forget the value of play. Shakespeare's reminder that all the world's a stage is not just a poetic line. It highlights the deeply psychological truth that life itself is a performance. Without playfulness, our lives become rigid. We feel boredom, exhaustion, and emptiness when spontaneity, authenticity, and passion are abandoned. Psychologically, what we need is not to eliminate folly, but to give it room. The fool archetype creates balance within us. Of course, unchecked folly can tip into irresponsibility, so the psyche naturally pairs it with the sage archetype. The sage brings discernment and humility, while the fool brings lightness and humor. Together they illustrate that wisdom is not found in control alone, but also in the capacity to laugh at ourselves. Archetypes, then, are not abstract concepts or intellectual categories. They are living images, manifestations of life patterns that stir the emotions and shape the way we relate to our own humanity. The fool carries within it a fascinating duality. On the surface, the fool may look simple, naive, even empty-headed. Etymologically, the Latin follis, meaning a pair of bellows releasing empty air, carries the implication of nothingness, an absence of substance. Yet, just as the bellows ignite fire by supplying oxygen, so too does the fool ignite the human spirit. Folly is not absence, it is fuel. In literature, the fool has been studied profoundly. In 1511, Erasmus released In Praise of Folly, where folly herself is given a voice. She playfully argues that without her, life would be flat. She critiques human behavior, even religious institutions, with a boldness that would have been considered dangerous. And yet, the brilliance of folly is that even its truth-telling appears clothed in humor, making space for laughter where sharp critique might otherwise provoke resistance. We see folly not only in books, but in relationships, friendships, and marriages. In their healthiest forms, tolerate and even celebrate folly. We overlook the imperfections of those we love, choosing to honor the humanity in their flaws. Even intellectual pursuit is not immune. The scholar who devotes decades to accumulating knowledge may, in folly, believe their contributions monumental, only to be read by a handful across time. Yet here, folly serves as both fuel and illusion, the very thing that sustains effort, despite limited recognition. Philosophers, whom folly pokes fun at, often destroy illusion in their quest for truth, forgetting that illusions themselves are a necessary veil of meaning, helping us endure the complexities of life. The fool, paradoxically, is freer and happier than those bound by the weight of wisdom. In their innocence, fools speak truth, unfiltered, not to manipulate, but simply because they cannot help but express it. Laughter, play, and lightheartedness become therapeutic forces, restoring vitality when seriousness has drained us dry. To live without folly is to live in negation of what makes us alive. Folly is not only universal, but also essential for psychological health. To embrace our own foolishness, in moderation, is itself a deep act of wisdom. The fool's essence also connects us with a simpler way of being. Rather than intellect, it speaks the language of the heart. There is a psychological resonance in the notion that sometimes those who appear unlearned perceive life's truths with greater clarity than those restricted by convention. Folk wisdom, proverbs, and simplicity often contain truths that formal philosophies sometimes obscure. Fyodor Dostoevsky reminds us of this paradox directly. Wisdom is found in the ability to call oneself a fool, even occasionally. This reversal is fundamental because true wisdom recognizes the incompleteness of knowledge. Psychologically, to embrace our foolishness is to cultivate humility. In literature and in life, the intertwining of madness and wisdom emerges again and again. The wise fool paradox reveals that those who appear mad may in fact hold a deeper truth that society resists. Sometimes wisdom is silenced under the accusation of madness, not because it is untrue, but because it is uncomfortable. In this sense, folly becomes a mask for wisdom, and wisdom a mask that fools wear. Socrates stands as the archetypal wise fool. His method was not to display his knowledge, but to reveal the ignorance of others, and in so doing, acknowledge his own. His wisdom lay in admitting the limits of his understanding, and paradoxically, this humility was his strength. In psychological terms, this is the ultimate embrace of the fool, an awareness that to know one's ignorance is, itself, a profound form of knowledge. You see, human perception often lives on the edge of paradox. As Shakespeare reminds us, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." In psychology, this forms a striking truth about self-awareness. There are, in fact, two ways the mind deceives itself, either by believing what is false or by refusing to recognize what is true. Both are distortions of reality, both are defenses against discomfort, and when the truth becomes unbearable, when those in authority dare not speak, it is usually the figure of the fool who emerges as the mouthpiece. The fool embodies a raw courage. He dares to articulate what others repress, and in doing so, he offers both disruption and relief. People laugh, but they also know, deep within, that they have witnessed a truth that needed to be named. From a psychological perspective, we can separate fools into two archetypal types. The natural fool who lacks social filters, stumbling into honesty without awareness of boundaries, and the professional fool who with intention translates pain into palatable form through satire, comedy, and wit. One speaks from impulse, the other from strategy. Yet both reveal that foolishness is not necessarily ignorance. Indeed, the greatest fools often carry a sharper intelligence than those who mock them. The fool's daring lies in his refusal to suppress. His power emerges because, paradoxically, he is not a fool at all. William Blake captured the psychological essence of this paradox when he wrote, "If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise." Here we confront the figure of the fool, the clown, the trickster, symbols that move fluidly between laughter and revelation. They evoke comic release, but also expose the fragility of human order. Their duality expresses itself as folly and wisdom, chaos and clarity, darkness disguised as jest. What appears as entertainment often holds the shadow of a warning. Søren Kierkegaard illustrates this with a haunting metaphor. A fire erupts backstage. The clown rushes before the audience to give warning. They laugh, believing it a performance. He warns again. They laugh louder. And so, Kierkegaard observes, the world will come to its end amidst applause. Psychologically, this speaks to denial. Laughter becomes defense, a way to dismiss what feels too threatening. And yet, within the art of fooling, lies the function of awakening. The professional fool, historically and today, has acted as a mirror for society's illusions and blind spots. However, the paradox runs deeper. Many fools are born of anguish. Comedy emerges not from lightness, but from shadow. This is what psychologists refer to as the sad clown paradox. The comedian who wears laughter as armor, whose humor masks depression, anxiety, or rage. Suppressed aggression transforms into performance, and the audience's laughter conceals an undercurrent of pity, fear, or unease. Sometimes the reaction is darker still, complete aversion. For certain individuals, clowns evoke terror, even phobia, coulrophobia, the clinical fear of clowns. In our modern psyche, the clown has shifted from playful to uncanny, becoming a recurring symbol of horror in literature and film. Why? Perhaps because the clown is trapped, forever expected to perform joy, to be the object of laughter, regardless of his own suffering. This forced one-sided identity fractures the self. Over time, the mask corrodes the soul, and what emerges is the shadow, the darker, disowned side of the psyche. Nowhere is this better represented than in the Joker, an archetype of the wounded, distorted clown, embodying both chaos and malevolence. Yet these themes are not new. In medieval theater, clowns were never only harmless entertainers. They stirred laughter, but they also terrified, sometimes seizing the audience in symbolic gestures of damnation, dragging them toward the hellmouth, an image of the monstrous jaws of the underworld. The clown has always carried this dual charge, the power to elevate joy, but also to embody terror. He is both guardian and disruptor, healer and haunt. And so, psychologically, his face is never singular. It is a mask split between light and shadow, folly and truth. The Fool and the Trickster, a psychological exploration. Let us pause and turn our attention to two symbolic figures that have lived in myth, theater, and the unconscious mind alike, the Fool and the Trickster. Though they may appear similar on the surface, both playful, both unpredictable, their psychological functions differ in subtle yet profound ways. The Fool, in psychological terms, emerges as a figure of innocence, naivete, or uncalculated spontaneity. He would not seek to inflict harm. His gestures are direct, authentic, and often childlike. The Trickster, by contrast, arises from a darker, more cunning space of the psyche. He thrives in deception, in distorting appearances, in orchestrating situations not merely to entertain but to mock. His laughter is never neutral. It feeds on what the Germans aptly call Schadenfreude, harm joy, the pleasure derived from another's downfall, misfortune, or humiliation. Outwardly, the trickster may even comfort the fallen, but inwardly he delights in their collapse, dwelling in the delicious paradox of sympathy laced with secret relish. When the possibility of manipulation presents itself, he does not hesitate, he pounces. The fool, however, participates differently in the play of laughter. His humor is never predatory. He does not laugh at others, but with them, or even at himself. In laughing at oneself, something unique occurs psychologically. The heavy mask of persona is loosened, the social armor disarmed. The fool allows vulnerability to emerge, and in that vulnerability, both he and the audience are freed from pretense. This act feels courageous, for to make oneself the object of laughter voluntarily is to open a door. Behind that door lies the possibility of deeper authenticity, where a message may not simply be heard but absorbed at a visceral level. In moments of tension, the fool embodies resilience. When hardship weighs down the atmosphere, it is often the one willing to risk looking ridiculous who lightens the heaviness. By making a joke, even at his own expense, the fool transforms the environment. He releases not only himself, but grants others permission to exhale, to momentarily lay aside their burdens. His humor radiates hope, turning despair into survivable comedy. The trickster, by contrast, is less concerned with collective relief. He seeks primarily his own amusement, even at the cost of another's dignity. Where the fool's humor unites, the trickster's humor divides. There is also a distinction in how their presence manifests. The fool's actions are usually transparent, obvious to the eye, and immediately recognized for what they are. The trickster, however, cloaks his intentions. He often disguises himself as the fool, weaving ambiguity into the space. Others do not detect the trap until they are already caught, already laughing, already fooled without realizing. Where the fool exposes himself, the trickster conceals. Historically, these archetypes were given literal roles. In medieval Europe, the royal court employed the jester not merely as comic relief, but as a living talisman. The fool was expected to entertain through music, satire, juggling, mimicry, and stories. It was said his presence could ward off the evil eye. But this old belief conceals a deeper truth. Psychologically, the fool guards against psychic rigidity. By allowing the fool within the psyche to speak, we offer ourselves freshness, vitality, and a refusal to calcify into lifeless convention. Without him, the inner kingdom risks becoming barren, devoid of humor, innovation, or play. This same symbolic value was dramatized in the Middle Ages during the Feast of Fools. On New Year's Day, the lower clergy would suspend order and turn hierarchy inside out. Sacred rituals were mocked, church officials lampooned, and suppressed impulses, resentment, lust, rebellion, were unleashed in carnival form. Though condemned and forced underground, such festivals performed a critical psychic task. They made room for the rejected and chaotic energies. They allowed shadow elements to safely erupt, rather than to fester dangerously beneath repression. The fool in the king's court had a unique privilege. Unlike anyone else, he could speak freely, even mock authority, including the king himself. He was simultaneously insider and outsider, tolerated precisely because his role was to puncture pretensions, to destabilize false power through humor. To signal this paradoxical authority, the fool carried a parody of royal regalia, the cap with bells instead of a crown, the bauble instead of a scepter. The miniature head on the bauble could speak in place of the jester, serving as a psychological device, a kind of projection through which taboo truths could slip past censorship. And while the fool was often protected by his office, he lived with danger. Those who pushed too far sometimes paid with their lives. Psychologically, the fool stands for what society rejects. He embodies rebellion against norms, incompetence in the eyes of rigid structures, and misfit qualities that refuse assimilation. He is often cast aside, misunderstood, or ridiculed. But here lies the paradox. Every culture requires such a figure. Without the fool, social structures stagnate. Without the trickster, unconscious forces go unacknowledged. These archetypes are the agents of rupture and renewal. They distort, they disrupt, they challenge, and in doing so, they provide the necessary space for transformation. Thus, to recognize the fool within ourselves is not to embrace weakness, but to allow authentic play, candor, and vulnerability. To confront the trickster in our psyche is to admit our capacity for mischief, manipulation, and shadowed laughter. Both are essential psychological energies. Denied, they become destructive. Integrated, they enliven the soul and keep the human psyche supple, creative, and real. Court jesters, for much of history, carried a kind of paradoxical role in human society. They were often born with physical deformities, emerging from impoverished families where they were perceived as burdens. Yet precisely because of their unusual bodies, they were elevated into positions of symbolic importance, transformed into natural fools, used to draw out laughter and reflection in the spaces of royal courts. Their deformities were seen less as accidents of biology and more as divine marks, signifiers of fate or cosmic intention. Dwarfs, hunchbacks, and others who did not conform to ordinary physical standards were frequently chosen to stand in these liminal positions. It was not uncommon for dwarfs to be exchanged as gifts between royal families, residing in palaces where their presence exaggerated the stature of kings, amplifying the imagery of power and authority. Yet behind the amusement they created, these individuals occupied a deeper psychological space, excluded from the common flow of life. They turned inward. Their isolation, suffering and exclusion became a pressure that unlocked a rare form of insight and symbolic wisdom, making their role closer to a bearer of hidden truth than a mere entertainer. In Shakespeare's King Lear, this symbolic function comes alive in the fool's relationship with the king. Lear, stripped of certainty and loyalty, turns obsessively toward the fool, not merely as a companion, but as a fragmented piece of himself, a mirror, an alter ego. When deserted by others, the king longs repeatedly for the fool, resisting loneliness by demanding his presence. The fool embodies a reversal of order. He is at once outside of the courtly hierarchy, and yet indispensable to it, both powerless and profoundly powerful. Within this paradox, the fool becomes an archetypal figure of psychological integration. He speaks truth, disguised as jest, exposes the fragility of those in power, and reimagines subservience as authority through wit. Shakespeare exaggerated this dynamic for the stage, but psychologically, the fool functioned as the voice of unconscious wisdom, challenging the illusions of status and piercing through the masks of authority. This archetype appears again in myth, especially in the legend of Parsifal, the innocent fool of Arthurian tradition. Parsifal's journey speaks less of external conquest and more of internal initiation. He grows up in isolation with his protective mother, until the sight of knights awakens in him a longing that pulls him away from comfort. His path is filled with symbolic trials, each pressing him to shift from childish naivety into the painful awareness of manhood. At the center of the myth is the wounded Fisher King, guardian of the Grail, whose unhealed wound renders both himself and the kingdom barren. The wound here symbolizes the universal psychological break each adolescent endures, the loss of innocence, the sudden collision with mortality, suffering, and estrangement. It is the recognition that joy is never pure, that existence is fractured. Yet this wound, though devastating, is also initiation. It is the price of consciousness, the beginning seed of transformation. Each night in the Grail Castle, an eternal ritual unfolds. A maiden carries the sacred vessel, the Grail filled with wine, and whoever drinks is gifted their deepest longing. Yet the Fisher King stands just outside this fulfillment. Though surrounded by abundance, beauty, and meaning, he cannot partake. His suffering reveals a central psychological truth. If the inner self is deeply wounded, no external gift, no surrounding joy can reach us. This is one of the starkest human experiences, to be so close to fullness, yet cut off, estranged by one's own inner injury. Prophecy had long foretold that only an innocent fool, one undefended, uncalculated, and uncorrupted, could pose the healing question that releases the king from his torment. The myth turns on this moment. One day, Parsifal encounters the Fisher King and is guided to the Grail Castle. He enters, sees the agony of the wounded monarch, but fails to ask the crucial question. Bound by his mother's prohibitions, her injunction against curiosity, he is trapped in silence. His obedience to the maternal law eclipses his capacity for compassion, sabotaging the initiation bestowed upon him by his godfather-like teacher. By refusing to break the silence, Parsifal loses the chance for immediate transformation. Upon leaving, the castle vanishes, and he must wander for 20 long years. These decades represent a psychological exile, the long, painful maturation required before one is ready to truly see the inner world again. For the Grail Castle never ceases to exist. It is only veiled, invisible, until perception has been radically altered. In later tellings of the story, Parsifal eventually returns to the invisible castle, newly awakened to his task. This time, when confronted with the king's silent agony, he asks the destined question, "Whom does the Grail serve?" In that moment, the barren land is restored, the king's wound is healed, and balance returns to the kingdom. The symbolism here touches the very core of human psychology. The Grail is not merely an object. It represents the center of all meaning, the higher self, the transcendent ground of life. To ask whom the Grail serves is to understand that the purpose of existence is not personal possession, but service to the sacred, to the self that is greater than ego. Healing begins when the innocent fool becomes the conscious servant of this deeper order, integrating wound with wisdom, barrenness with abundance, and finally reconciling human vulnerability with the eternal. Jungian analyst Robert A. Johnson once observed that a man must be willing to turn inward, to a seemingly foolish, childlike and untamed part of himself, in order to find real healing. He tells us, "The inner fool is the only one who can touch his Fisher King wound." This statement takes us immediately into the paradox of human psychology. That which appears most absurd, most undeveloped, and most laughable within us may be the very key to transformation and renewal. If we turn to literature, we see this motif come vividly alive. Consider Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote, often hailed as the first modern novel. In it we encounter a man overtaken by books and fantasies of chivalry, who declares himself a knight-errant under the name Don Quixote. Riding an old frail horse, he embarks on noble quests, defending the helpless, punishing the wicked, but more often than not, he succeeds only in creating confusion, injury, and chaos. His every action is consecrated to a peasant woman whom he elevates in his imagination into a noble princess, though she never takes form within the story itself. This gap between his inner image and outward reality is crucial. It illustrates the dangerous yet essential human capacity for projection and idealization. The term quixotic has entered our language to describe those who blur the line between the real and the imagined, those who chase high ideals that appear impractical or even delusional. The most symbolic episode of this is his battle with windmills, which he mistakes for menacing giants. From that vision comes the common idiom, tilting at windmills, attacking enemies that exist only in one's mind. Along the way, Don Quixote recruits Sancho Panza, a plain-spoken peasant who agrees to serve as squire with dreams of reward. Sancho, grounded and worldly, becomes the foil to Don Quixote's soaring and untethered fantasies, embodying the dialectic between realism and idealism that plays out in all human psyches. Yet Cervantes presents a profound irony. Though Don Quixote's aspirations come from a place of good intention, his actions often wound those they are meant to uplift. In failing to perceive reality as it is, he causes harm. To those around him, he appears not merely foolish, but wholly mad. And yet, within his madness there is wit. Beyond his absurd illusions, there is an intelligence that surfaces whenever he avoids the subject of knightly quests. What Cervantes suggests here is deeply psychological. Even the most rational, intelligent individual is not immune from the seduction of their own folly and unconscious delusion. As the novel nears its end, the tone shifts. Don Quixote, after illness and prolonged adventures, falls into sleep and awakens from his dream, not only waking from slumber, but awakening from madness itself. Suddenly he recognizes his life as wasted, his visions now revealed as folly. The narrative world turns from comedy to tragedy. Those who once mocked him with derision now look with compassion. Curiously, they insist that his previous identity as knight was real, as though they preferred him mad but vibrant rather than lucid and broken by reality. In the end, when his sustaining illusions dissolve, Don Quixote dies, undone by the sheer weight of what is real, a death by truth, an overdose of reality. This invites the timeless psychological question, which is the greater burden, to know the truth and live in sorrow, or to persist in illusion and thus preserve a kind of blissful vitality? Can ignorance in some cases be more life-giving than grim awareness? Fyodor Dostoevsky takes up this very paradox in his novel The Idiot. The central figure, Prince Myshkin, is conceived as the positively beautiful individual placed within a society steeped in corruption, greed, and degeneration. Having spent years in a Swiss sanatorium, treated for epilepsy and a condition once called idiocy, a term of the time for neurological and mental afflictions, Myshkin returns to Russia only to collide head-on with the harsh realities of human pettiness and cruelty from the moment of his train journey to St. Petersburg. But unlike Don Quixote's deluded idealism, Myshkin embodies another form of foolishness, radical innocence. Dostoevsky himself noted, first of all, this prince is an idiot, and secondly, he is a fool, knows nothing of the world, and has no place in it. Yet Myshkin is no shallow figure of comedy. His openness, his unreserved honesty, and his almost naive purity hold up a mirror to those around him. He cannot posture, cannot dissemble, cannot manipulate social masks as others do. He speaks truth directly without strategy, often in settings where etiquette demands concealment. This virtue becomes, paradoxically, his downfall, because he doesn't play by society's rules of vanity and manipulation. He is ridiculed and dismissed as an idiot, while at the same time his insights into love, suffering, compassion, and the Christian heart of human existence mark him as uniquely sane. In him, innocence collides with corruption, revealing through contrast the depth of society's sickness. The fool in both Cervantes and Dostoevsky is not simply a comic figure, but a psychological archetype, a mirror of our divided selves. One figure teaches us that illusions can both animate and destroy, while the other reminds us that radical innocence can either redeem or provoke annihilation. Both point toward an uncomfortable truth, that foolishness in its deepest form may not be a weakness to eradicate, but the very medicine that touches our wounds, even if the cure itself feels indistinguishable from madness. Let us begin with a contrast, a polarity of the human condition. On one end we encounter Ippolit, a young man, consumed by illness, his body fading with tuberculosis, his mind burning with nihilism. Near the edge of death, he grows restless, detached, and almost antagonistic toward life itself. He declares, with conviction, that it is far better to awaken to the harshest knowledge, to live within unhappiness and truth, than to languish in the illusions of a fool's paradise. This statement is no simple philosophy. It is rebellion against society, against nature, and against the very presence of God. His refusal to embrace comfort exposes the raw psychology of despair, a will that no longer wishes to live, yet insists on clarity at all costs. On the other end, standing in gentle contrast, we see Prince Myshkin himself. He cannot comprehend why an individual would seek out unhappiness as truth. Instead of abstract theories or rebellion, his way is anchored in practice, in human connection. The prince does not retreat from those who have sinned. Rather, he sits with them, listens to them, and becomes their mirror of compassion. He embodies the quiet power of humility, the idea that redemption is woven not from grand gestures, but from the smallest acts of tenderness. To him, salvation lies in kindness, in the restoration of dignity to broken souls. It is here that Dostoevsky's most celebrated affirmation emerges, the belief that beauty alone has the power to redeem and save the world. At its core, this is less a philosophy than a psychology of hope. Now, consider another familiar archetype, the fool. In so many tales we meet the three brothers, and more often than not, it is the youngest, the one ridiculed for his simplicity, who emerges as the unlikely hero. The fool charges forward where wiser men hesitate, acting from impulse rather than calculation. Paradoxically, this recklessness yields the miraculous, the hand of the princess, the crown of the kingdom. The fool seems guided by forces that others dismiss as luck or magic, yet his vitality comes from a peculiar blending of wisdom, folly, innocence, and instinct. When harmonized, these elements create transcendence. When unbalanced, they collapse into chaos. Psychologically, the fool embodies the raw spontaneity of the psyche, a reminder that some truths are accessible only to those cast aside as misguided or naive. In Russian folklore, this archetype fully emerges in the beloved figure of Ivan the Fool. Tolstoy himself draws upon this motif in his tale of Ivan, the youngest son of a peasant family. Unlike his brothers who are ensnared by ambition, one by money, the other by power, Ivan enters the world stripped of guile. His naivety, kindness, and ability to forgive render him vulnerable, yet also strangely invincible. Though ridiculed, he commits himself to the care of his father and mute sister, working in obscurity. When his brothers demand their inheritance, provoked by greed, Ivan agrees without protest, valuing peace above conflict. Here the psychology of temptation unfolds. The old devil, dismayed by harmony, introduces division. Sending his servants to stir hatred, greed, and rivalry, he hopes to fracture Ivan's world. Though stricken by illness and deception, Ivan perseveres, working harder, enduring more. Each devil who seeks to corrupt him instead becomes disarmed when Ivan, with disarming innocence, spares them and utters only a blessing. This act, devoid of calculation, transforms his curse into miracle: gold from leaves, soldiers from straw. Unlike his brothers who misuse their temptations, Ivan redistributes wealth to the villagers, dissolving power into joy. In the end, even the old devil himself collapses before Ivan's strength of spirit. What is revealed here psychologically is the triumph of heart over manipulation, of authenticity over corruption. Ivan, who possessed nothing, receives everything, the fool unveiled as the true hero. This figure has a parallel symbol in the tarot. There we find the fool, wandering into the unknown, a flower of innocence in one hand, a bundle of meager belongings in the other. His eyes gaze upward toward infinite possibilities, while the earth beneath his feet gives way to danger, a cliff waiting. A dog calls out, trying to ground him, yet he continues forward, intoxicated with life, unconcerned with the abyss. This image represents more than naivete. It reflects the beginning of the psyche's journey, the innocence required to step into transformation. Tarot itself originated in the Renaissance, born first as imagery for Italian festivals, decks designed for play and symbol. The very word, tarocchi, translates into foolishness, reminding us that much of our human journey is cloaked in paradox. The fool's journey in psychological terms is the unfolding of individuation, a wanderer embracing risk, curiosity, vulnerability, and openness to what lies ahead. He is mocked because he appears naive, yet psychologically he holds a wisdom that others resist, the courage to begin, unprotected, and to discover that wholeness can emerge not from certainty, but from walking forward into the unknown. In the 18th century, a symbolic practice began to emerge more prominently: cartomancy, the art of seeking meaning through cards. Within this tradition, 78 images became known as arcana, or hidden truths. 22 of these images form what is called the major arcana, representing greater archetypal themes, while the remaining 56 form the minor arcana, reflecting day-to-day experiences of the psyche. Among them, the fool is given the number 0, an unbounded position, appearing most often as the first step in the major arcana, though paradoxically also as its end. At the conclusion of the series lies the world, a card showing a laurel wreath, signifying completion and wholeness. It is within this circle that the fool, portrayed as androgynous and eternal, becomes the cosmic dancer and the living presence of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. Yet here lies the paradox of psychic development. Just as wholeness is reached, the cycle recommences. Individuation is not a static state, but a continuous unfolding. Thus, the fool embodies alpha and omega, beginning and end, innocence and return. The fool is heroic, precisely because he departs willingly from the familiar, stepping off the ledge into the mystery of the unknown. The symbolic journey of the fool parallels what Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung would later recognize as the universal pattern of the hero's journey, the monomyth of human growth. The call to adventure compels the hero to depart from the safe structures of the ordinary world and enter the special world, an unfamiliar realm that holds both danger and transformation. Here he must face his dragon, an image that stands for the internal shadow, fears long denied, traumas unhealed, or truths never confronted. In defeating or integrating this dragon, the hero uncovers the treasure, the hard-won gift of psychic gold. This process is both a symbolic death and rebirth, where outdated aspects of the self are relinquished to allow the emergence of a new, evolved identity. Yet the journey is incomplete until the hero returns to the community, bearing the gift, whether wisdom, compassion, or simple resilience, that has the power to heal both self and others. The fool, as an archetype of this journey, is no mere wanderer, but a timeless psychic energy, restless, ageless, and ever in motion. He is paradoxically the most powerful of the trumps, not because he holds authority, but because he embodies transformation itself, forever unfolding, forever becoming. In psychological terms, the fool represents the initiation into life's great mystery, with each card of the major arcana laying out the series of encounters and trials on the archetypal path to individuation. The phrase Carl Jung used to describe the process of becoming truly oneself, whole and integrated. In practice, tarot can be used as a method of amplification, one of Jung's techniques for exploring the unconscious. Amplification means allowing an image, whether from a dream, vision, or fantasy, to reveal its depth by setting it alongside a wider field of myths, symbols, and cultural archetypes. Tarot imagery, when considered symbolically rather than literally, serves as a mirror of consciousness and unconscious material. It is no accident that the fool bears the zero, the great circle of nothingness and infinity, the perfect symbol of boundless potential, eternal return, and the unending flux of psychic life. In alchemical and esoteric thought, this circularity is depicted in the Ouroboros, the serpent swallowing its own tail. It conveys eternity, return, and the indivisibility of all things summed up in the ancient maxim, "One is all, and all is one." Within this symbol lies what Gnostic traditions called the pleroma, a fullness where past, present, and future converge into timeless unity. It reflects the ancient notion that divinity is like an infinite sphere, its center present everywhere, its circumference found nowhere. The image of the circle with a central point holds equally rich meaning. It is the symbol of the sun, source of warmth and illumination, and simultaneously the emblem of the world egg, the womb of creation from which life endlessly arises. Psychologically, it recalls paradise, the state of unreflective wholeness experienced before the rupture of consciousness. It evokes our deep nostalgia for childhood, when existence was unbroken, before opposites divided and before the burden of self-awareness was felt. Such longing is the pull toward the primordial circle, the union of all polarities once contained in a timeless womb of perfection. From the Jungian perspective, this image reflects the architecture of the psyche. The central point represents the ego, the locus of conscious identity, while the encircling whole is the self. the totality of the psyche that embraces both the conscious and the unconscious. To move from the point to the circle is the work of individuation, the same eternal dance of the fool, stepping forward, leaving safety, confronting the dragon, returning with treasure, and beginning again. Voice of Jung, reflective, contemplative. It is not I who create myself. Rather, I happen to myself. Let these words resonate in the depth of your mind. The fool, an archetype evolving through ages, hides in plain sight, disguised beneath the joker in our playing cards. Imagine this figure, shifting shapes of beggar, madman, fool, each mask a different manifestation of primal human nature. Narrator descriptive, immersive. Trace back to the 15th century's ancient Visconti Sforza tarot, the oldest known cards. The fool appears as a ragged vagabond, no shoes, feathers tangled in wild hair, clutching a stick. This wild man, a symbol of untamed instinct, walks a path unknown. Journey forward to the Solar Busca tarot, where he dons a feathered headdress and plays a bagpipe, an emblem of wild freedom. Or to the German Hofämterspiel, barefoot but cloaked in robe and bells, echoing the court jester's dance between madness and humor. The Mantegna tarocchi reveals a semi-naked old man leaning on a staff with misero inscribed, miserable yet unyielding as a creature tugs at his attention. Inner voice, intuitive, gentle. The fool is intimately bound to instinct. No need for sight, for his inner animal guides him. Picture the fool blindfolded in ancient French cards, stumbling forward not by vision, but by profound insight. The fool relies on intuitive wisdom, far beyond ordinary logic. In the Swiss cards, he appears as a full jester, wand in hand. The Tarot of Marseille from the 17th–1830 centuries shows him wearing bright jester's hat, carrying possessions on a stick, chased or playfully followed by animals and butterflies, symbols of chaos and transformation. Voice of transformation, encouraging, wise. Consider the iconic image from the Rider-Waite deck, 1909, the fool poised at the cliff's edge, about to step into the unknown. This image, born of esoteric wisdom, embodies beginnings, the messy, uncertain birth of transformation. Psychologically, the fool is the first spark of change, the nascent flame from which renewal ignites. Without the fool, no journey starts. Voice of the sage, truthful, candid. Inventors and geniuses have almost always been looked on as no better than fools at the beginning and often at the end of their careers. See the power in being the beginner, the one with Shoshin, the beginner's mind of Zen, a mind open, free from expertise's limiting confines. In this openness lies infinite possibility, unfolding patiently like silence. The sacred void where the numinous whispers, Jung imperative, paradoxical. The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom. To embark inwardly, to discover oneself, is the soul's sacred foolishness. Society demands a linear march, education, work, marriage, but deviating calls forth ridicule. The fool's path leads only to poverty and misery. Yet, the first step, uncertain and raw, is greatest. Narrator, motivational, vivid. Imagine the fool's heart swelling with dreams, excited by adventure, undeterred by mistakes. He thinks quickly, acts boldly, living fully. Contrast him with the overthinking mind, trapped in fear, frozen by uncertainty. Many would rather suffer failure than endure the paralytic torment of anxious anticipation. But failure, it is the gateway, unlocking unforeseen doors. What seems like ruin births possibility. Alchemist sits, voice mysterious, poetic. In filth, it will be found. Often what you seek lies hidden where you least dare to look. The fool plunges into the unknown, blind to the trials ahead, a fearless presence in the moment, embracing change unshaken by warnings. Each stumble, each fall, only deepens his resolve. No great soul has ever avoided mistakes. Voice of the poet, reflective, timeless. It is the journey that matters, not the destination. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Shadow voice warning, somber. Yet within the fool lies hazard, a stubbornness blinding reflection. Standing at the cliff's edge, heedless, he risks the fall. Our inner voice may twist protective instincts into judgment. Careful, you still look a fool. Such a question invites ridicule. You sound ridiculous. Whisper of conformity, cautionary. This voice breeds conformity, safety in mediocrity, sacrificing true desire for approval. Ignoring the fool within spawns jealousy, shame, neurotic shadows. Voice of depth, analytical, profound. In the dance toward individuation, the fool embodies both drive and resistance, a mirror of eternal youth. This youth's energy can spark creativity or trap us in adolescent illusions, stalling growth. The fool aligns closely with the child archetype, unmasked by societal weight, closer to instinct than superego. Child and madman share freedom from daily burdens, from the ceaseless flood of external demands. Tone of lightness, joyful, free. The fool is light-hearted, optimistic, unburdened by gravity of seriousness. Nietzsche pondered. Man's maturity, to have regained the seriousness that he had as a child at play. Analyst sets voice, clinical, symbolic. Marie-Louise von Franz relates the fool to Jung's concept of the inferior function, the least developed aspect of psyche, beyond the dominant psychological functions, thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. For example, a thinking type's inferior function may be feeling, yet the fool transcends this. He emerges as an archetypal, almost religious figure. Von Franz revealing spiritual, he implies a part of the human personality which remains behind and thus retains the primal wholeness of nature. He symbolizes a specific, predominantly religious function. In mythology, when the fool appears as the fourth figure in a quartet, he reflects the behavior of the inferior function. The fool stands as the despised, unadapted part of self, but also the crucial bridge to unconscious totality. He connects mundanity with imagination, unlocking hidden treasures. The inferior function guides healing, the mending of psychic wounds. Voice of the holy fool, courageous, transcendent. The holy fool embraces risk, ridicule, scorn, rejection for the sake of truth and love. He exhibits integrity, unwavering selfhood, untethered from others' judgments, free of conventional values, fully present to another's essence. He is unstoppable, a threat to worldly powers and control. Voice of divine wisdom, hopeful, profound. Each soul is worthy of divine love and destined for spiritual growth. To be a fool for Christ's sake, as St. Paul teaches, means rejecting worldly wisdom for divine folly, embracing humility and ascetic life despite mockery. The fool is the herald of the Savior, the precursor of transformation. Paul Sepp's words echo timelessly. Let no man deceive himself. If any seem wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise.